The moment Emily saw her younger sister's eyes linger on her husband, and on Apache warrior whose very presence drew silence from a room, she felt the ground shift beneath her boots. It was only a glance, brief as the flicker of a match. But in the lawless desert of New Mexico territory, even a single spark could set the world ablaze. The year was 1876, a time when the land itself seemed caught between war and uneasy peace. The old wagon trails were still littered with bones of those who hadn't made it west. Bands of outlaws roamed freely, and soldiers marched restlessly through the scrub plains. Emily and Ayuka had carved out their homestead at the edge of the Rio Grande, a small cabin with walls of pine logs, a stone chimney, and windows that rattled whenever the wind came sweeping off the desert. Life was never easy, but it was theirs, and for Emily, it had been enough. Her husband, Ayuka, had returned from a long ride that evening, his horse dusted with red clay, his broad chest bare beneath the sunset glow. His long black hair fell in loose strands past his shoulders, and the lines of his face bore the strength of his people and the scars of battle. To Emily, he was not just a warrior, but the man who had pulled her from death 2 winters ago, when raiders left her for dead on the plains. He was her anchor, her protector, her heart. But across the dimly lit kitchen, her younger sister Sarah was staring at him as though he were something, forbidden, something both feared and desired. Sarah had arrived only 2 months ago, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and the weight of war behind her. At 22, she was still restless, quick-tempered, and beautiful in a way that drew attention she often pretended she didn't want. She had lost everything in Tennessee when the Union soldiers burned their father's farm, and Emily had brought her west to offer her a fresh start, a safe haven. Emily hadn't expected danger to come from within her own home. The lantern in the kitchen sputtered and hissed, shadows crawling across the log walls. Sarah stood at the basin, scrubbing dishes, but her hands moved slower than they should have. Her gaze kept drifting, always drifting to the man standing at the door. Ayuka didn't seem to notice. He was pouring water from a clay jug, tilting his head back, letting it roll down his throat, his chest glistening in the light. To Emily, it was the sight of her husband, weary from a long day. To Sarah, it was something else entirely, something Emily couldn't name but could feel deep in her bones. Long ride? Emily asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Ayuka glanced at her, a faint smile tugging his lips. Farther than I planned. The soldiers are moving north. Trouble may come sooner than we think. His words were heavy, but his tone steady, as always. He never wasted fear on what hadn't yet happened. Sarah, however, spoke too quickly. And you rode alone? That's dangerous. Emily's stomach nodded. The way Sarah's voice softened, the way her eyes shone, it was not the concern of a sister for her brother-in-law. It was something closer to hunger, a longing Sarah didn't even try to hide. Emily's grip tightened around the wooden spoon she held, knuckles whitening. She forced herself to breathe, to keep her face still. She told herself she was imagining things, that grief and hardship had simply made her sister fragile, too eager to cling to anyone strong. But then Sarah caught Emily's eyes. Just for a heartbeat, Sarah froze like a child caught stealing. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, scrubbing the dish harder, as if she could erase what Emily had already seen. Emily said nothing. Not yet. Words could wait, but silence carried weight too. The revolver above the mantel gleamed in the dim light, a reminder that in the Old West, the line between love and betrayal could be as sharp and deadly as steel. Outside, the desert wind howled, rattling the shutters. Emily's heart echoed the sound, fierce and hollow. She had fought too hard for this life, too hard for this man, to let it slip through her hands now. But the seed had been planted. And deep in her bones, she knew some secrets don't just stay hidden. They grow, they fester, and when they break the surface, They'd leave nothing but ruin. Emily tightened her jaw, staring at the back of her sister's head as Sarah bent over the basin. She would watch. She would wait. And God help them all if Sarah's glance turned into something more. For in the wide, unforgiving land of New Mexico, desire could be as dangerous as a loaded gun. The dawn came restless and pale, the kind of desert morning where the horizon glowed pink against the jagged mesas, and the Rio Grande whispered through the valley like a secret. Emily rose early to tend to the horses, leaving Sarah to her chores. But Sarah had other plans. With a bundle of linens in her arms, Sarah walked down toward the river. Her skirts brushed against sagebrush, the hem collecting dust as the sun pushed higher. She told herself she was there to wash clothes, but deep down, she knew it wasn't just the river that pulled her. The air smelled of mesquite and damp earth. The water ran cold and quick from the mountains, biting at her ankles as she waded in. She knelt on a flat stone, slapping a shirt against the surface, but her thoughts weren't on the chores. They were on Ioka, the way his shoulders moved when he lifted a saddle, the deep calm of his voice, the strength in his hands. She shook her head hard, ashamed, but the shame did not wash away. Behind her, the crunch of hooves startled her. She turned, and there he was. Ioka sat tall on his painted horse, his bare chest glistening in the rising sun, a necklace of turquoise beads against his dark skin. His long black hair, unbraided, spilled across his shoulders. He looked like he belonged to the land itself, wild, untamed, eternal. "You came alone?" His voice carried across the water, deep and steady. Sarah's heart stumbled. I thought I'd finish the wash before the heat." She tried to sound casual, but her hands trembled as she wrung the cloth. Ioka dismounted, leading his horse to drink. His gaze swept the riverbank, always alert. "The river is strong this morning. Stay close to the shore." But Sarah didn't stay close. Whether by accident or by something more reckless, she stepped deeper into the current, arms full of wet linen. Her boot slipped on a slick stone, and in an instant, the river seized her. The bundle of clothes scattered like pale ghosts on the surface. Sarah's cry tore across the valley as she struggled against the pull. "Sarah!" Ioka was in the water before she could take another breath. The cold struck him like knives, but his arms were iron as he caught her, pulling her tight against his chest. The current fought them, dragging at her skirts, but Ioka's strength was unyielding. With a final surge, he carried her back to the shallows. Lifting her onto the riverbank, Sarah collapsed onto the sand, gasping, her hair plastered across her face. Water streamed down her dress, clinging to every curve. She turned to him, eyes wide with something more than fear. "You saved me," she whispered, her lips trembling. Ioka knelt beside her, water dripping from his skin, his necklace glinting. "Foolish girl," he said, though his tone was more weary than harsh. "The river does not forgive carelessness." Her hand reached for his, fingers clinging to his wrist as though she never wanted to let go. "Nobody can't know." She breathed, the words barely more than a shiver. Not Emily. Not anyone. His dark eyes fixed on hers, unreadable, but heavy with meaning. For a long moment, they stayed locked like that, her desperation laid bare, his silence thick with conflict. Then, with a quiet firmness, he pulled his hand free. "You are my wife's sister," he said. "This, whatever you think you feel, must end here." But Sarah's heart didn't listen. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her lips parted, her whole body alive with a forbidden longing. "I can't help it," she whispered. Before Ioka could respond, footsteps crunched through the brush. Emily appeared, her basket of feed in her arms, her face pale when she saw them together by the riverbank. "Sarah? Ioka?" Her voice carried suspicion, though she masked it with a nervous smile. "What happened?" Sarah sprang to her feet too quickly. "I slipped. That's all." He helped me." Her words tumbled out like stones, too fast, too rehearsed. Emily's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Instead, she glanced at Ayoka. His face gave away nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any words. The river whispered at their feet, carrying secrets downstream. Emily's heart stirred with unease, though she didn't yet know why. Sarah, meanwhile, stood shivering in her wet dress, but inside she was burning. She had tasted the edge of something forbidden, and there was no turning back. And Ayoka, though he said nothing, felt the weight of a storm building, one that no warrior's strength could hold back forever. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment, the New Mexico sky stretched wide and cloudless. The next, a wall of black thunderheads swallowed the horizon. Emily stood on the porch, apron whipping in the wind as lightning forked across the desert. She had learned long ago that storms came fast and merciless in this land, and tonight would be no different. "Get the lanterns lit," she called, her voice rising above the howl. Sarah darted to obey, skirts rustling as she hurried inside. Ayoka was already at the barn, straining against the wind as he pulled the horses inside. His muscles rippled with effort, his long black hair plastered against his back by sheets of rain. Emily felt a pang of worry watching him, but also pride. This man faced storms the way he faced everything. Steady, unflinching, alive. By the time he joined them inside the cabin, the storm was raging. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire, and thunder shook the walls. The air smelled of wet earth and burning lamp oil. The three of them huddled close, lantern light flickering against the log walls. Emily worked quickly, gathering bandages and herbs. Ayoka's arm bore a fresh scrape where a wild branch had lashed him. She dabbed the wound gently, her hand steady, though her heart still raced from watching him struggle against the storm. "You should have waited," Emily said, her voice soft but scolding, his lips curved faintly. "The horses do not wait." "Neither can I." Sarah sat nearby, too quiet. Her eyes followed every movement, Emily's hand pressing cloth to Ayoka's arm, his steady gaze on his wife, the closeness between them. In the storm's flickering light, jealousy burned hotter than the fire in the hearth. Outside, a crack of thunder split the night, and a sudden shout of wind rattled the shutters. Then came another sound, sharper, more dangerous. The smell of smoke. Emily gasped, rushing to the window. The barn! Flames licked against the dark sky, the storm having driven lightning into the dry hay. Ayoka was on his feet instantly. He grabbed a bucket, shoving open the door against the storm. Rain drenched him instantly, streaking across his bare chest, but he didn't slow. Emily followed, clutching another pail. Sarah hesitated only a moment before running after them. The fire roared like a beast, consuming the barn wall, sparks carried wild by the wind. Together they formed a desperate chain, Ayoka at the front, throwing water onto the flames. Emily running between the well and the blaze. Sarah stumbling behind, skirts heavy with rain, breath ragged with fear. Lightning flashed, turning the night white. For an instant, Emily saw Sarah's face clearly, eyes locked on Ayoka, lips parted, a strange fire within her that had nothing to do with the burning barn. Faster. Ayoka shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Emily's arms ached, but she pressed on, flinging bucket after bucket. Slowly, painfully, the fire shrank beneath their effort, until only smoke and rain remained. At last, Ayoka staggered back, chest heaving, water and soot streaking his skin. Emily reached him first, pressing a trembling hand against his shoulder. Relief surged through her as she whispered, "It's done. We saved it." But when she turned, she saw Sarah staring at him, her face pale, her soaked dress clinging, her breath shallow as though she had been fighting something inside her more fierce than any fire. For a heartbeat, the three of them stood there, bound by silence, the storm raging around them. Emily felt the unease settle heavy in her chest. Heavier even than the buckets she had carried back inside the cabin. They dried by the hearth. Ayoka sat cross-legged, silent, his eyes on the flames. Emily busied herself with blankets. Her hands steady, though her thoughts were not. Sarah sat across the room, staring into the fire, her expression unreadable. But Emily knew what she had seen in her sister's eyes outside: longing, raw and dangerous. Burning as bright as the barn itself had moments before. The storm raged on, but the true fire now lived inside the cabin. A fire Emily feared no rain could ever put out. The storm passed, but its echoes lingered, blackened beams in the barn, the smell of char in the air, and an uneasiness Emily could not name. When the tribe invited Ayoka to a gathering in the canyon that week, Emily welcomed the chance for distraction. She and Sarah went with him, traveling on horseback through dry washes and sunlit cliffs until the land opened into a wide red canyon, carved by centuries of wind. By the time they arrived, dusk had painted the sky with copper and violet. Fires blazed in stone circles, their smoke rising into the twilight. Drums pounded, steady as a heartbeat, echoing off the canyon walls. The Apache men and women moved with rhythm older than words, their voices weaving chants that stirred the very earth beneath Emily's boots. Emily loved these gatherings. They reminded her that life could be more than survival, that joy, pride, and tradition had their own strength. She stood close to Ayoka as he greeted his people, his presence commanding respect. The flicker of firelight danced across his bare chest, his turquoise and bone jewelry gleaming against his skin. But Emily wasn't the only one watching. Sarah lingered near the edge of the fire circle, her face half lit, her eyes fixed on Ayoka with an intensity that made Emily's stomach knot. It wasn't just admiration, it was hunger, dangerous and raw. Emily told herself not to look, not to see, but she couldn't unsee it. The drumming grew louder, and the warriors began their dance. Ayoka stepped into the circle, his body moving with fluid strength, each motion a story told through firelight and shadow. He leapt and turned, his muscles rippling, his hair flying loose. The earth seemed to answer him, the canyon walls amplifying every beat, every step. Emily's heart swelled with pride. To her, he was not just her husband, but living proof of survival, of honor, of something sacred. She clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer of thanks that fate had brought him to her. Yet when she glanced toward Sarah, she saw her sister clutching the rock wall, breathless, as though she were watching something forbidden. Sarah's knuckles were white against the stone, her lips parted, her whole being caught in the dance. The fire cracked, sparks flying into the night. Ayoka raised his arms, his voice joining the chant. His chest glistened with sweat, his necklace rattled against his skin, and his eyes flashed with the spirit of the dance. Emily felt warmth and belonging. Sarah felt something else entirely. When the dance ended, cheers filled the canyon. Ayoka bowed his head, stepping back from the circle, his breath steady despite the power he had poured into the movements. Emily touched his arm with pride. "You were magnificent," she whispered. He gave her a faint smile, but his eyes drifted toward the fire, already elsewhere. Sarah, however, didn't move from her place by the canyon wall. She was trembling. Emily went to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Sarah startled, blinking as though waking from a dream. "Yes," she stammered too quickly. "Just the heat, that's all." But Emily knew better. Later, as the fires burned lower and the canyon quieted, Emily found Sarah sitting apart, staring into the embers. The drums had faded, replaced by the soft sounds of night, the whisper of wind, the call of an owl, the crackle of dying fire. "You were staring at him," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling despite herself. Sarah turned sharply, eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. "I wasn't. Don't lie to me," Emily cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. I see it. I've seen it for days now." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight, full of secrets too heavy to hold. Then finally, she whispered, "Nobody can't know." The words hit Emily like a blade. Her breath caught, her chest tightened, and she realized with horror that this was no passing glance, no fleeting fancy. This was something deeper, darker, more dangerous. Ayoka returned just then, his shadow stretching across the fire-lit ground. Sarah snapped her mouth shut, her eyes dropping. Emily stood quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her heart, but the canyon seemed to know. The fire hissed low, the wind shifted cold, and Emily felt the truth settling in her bones. Whatever storm had begun inside her sister, it was far from over, and this one, Emily feared, no water or fire could save them from. The sun rose sharp and merciless, washing the desert in a light so blinding it seemed to bleach the very bones of the earth. Sarah squinted against it, the brim of her straw hat offering little shade. She sat astride a mule, trailing behind Emily and Ayoka as they led the cattle toward the southern pasture. The herd's restless lowing carried on the hot wind, and the metallic jingle of tacks seemed to throb in Sarah's ears like an omen dot she hadn't slept well the night before. The memory of the canyon dance haunted her, Ayoka's powerful body gleaming in the firelight, his movements primal, magnetic. She had tried to shake it off, to tell herself she was being foolish, that Emily was her sister and deserved loyalty above all. But the way Ayoka's eyes had flicked toward her, even for an instant, had burned her deeper than she cared to admit. By midday, the herd reached the open meadow. Emily dismounted first, checking the broken fence line, while Ayoka rode along the perimeter. Sarah was just reaching for her canteen when a sound split the air. A gunshot. The cattle scattered in a panicked wave. Sarah's mule brayed and bucked, nearly throwing her before she regained the reins. Dust erupted all around as more shots cracked like lightning across the plain. Outlaws. They came thundering over the ridge, half a dozen men on horseback, their faces half hidden by bandanas, rifles flashing in the sun. Sarah's chest clenched in terror as she saw one of them aiming straight for Emily. "Emily!" Sarah screamed, but Ayoka was faster. He spurred his horse forward, cutting through the stampede with terrifying control. He leapt from the saddle as one outlaw charged, tackling the man clean off his horse. The two hit the ground in a brutal tangle of fists and dust. Sarah's heart pounded as she saw Emily draw her revolver, hand steady, eyes hard. She fired once, and one outlaw dropped from his horse. But there were still too many. "Ayoka!" Emily shouted, throwing him her lasso. He caught it mid-swing, wrapping it around another rider's wrist and yanking him clean off his mount. But as the outlaw fell, another raised his rifle and fired. The sound cracked through the air like thunder. Sarah's stomach turned cold. She saw the spray of blood across Ayoka's bare shoulder, saw him stumble to one knee, clutching the wound. "No!" she cried, without thinking, kicking her mule forward. Emily was still holding off two riders, her shots quick and deadly, but Sarah had only one thought: reach him. She slid from her mule, running through the chaos, skirts tearing on mesquite thorns. The smell of dust, blood, and sweat filled her lungs until she was choking on it. Ayoka looked up at her as she fell to her knees beside him. His long black hair was tangled with dust and sweat, his chest heaving, his jewelry rattling faintly as he tried to rise. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, blood dripping down his arm. But Sarah was already pressing her hands against the wound, feeling the hot wetness seep between her fingers. "Be quiet. Don't move," she whispered fiercely, panic breaking through her voice. For one suspended moment, the world around them blurred, the gunfire, the screams, the pounding hooves, all of it dissolved into the raw closeness between them. His dark eyes locked on hers, and she felt a current, dangerous and undeniable, run through her. "Sarah," he started, but the sound of Emily shouting his name broke whatever spell hung there. Emily rode up hard, firing her last round into the sky to scatter the remaining outlaws. They wheeled off, retreating over the ridge as quickly as they had come, leaving only dust and silence in their wake. Emily leapt down, rushing to Ayoka's side. "You're hit," she said, her voice trembling though her hands were steady. She glanced at Sarah, who was still pressing against the wound. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Sarah thought her sister saw too much, her desperation, her closeness to him, the tremor in her hands. "I'll bind it," Emily said briskly, pulling a strip from her own skirt and crouching beside him. Her hands brushed Sarah's as she took over, and Sarah felt heat rush to her face, though not from the desert sun. Ayoka grimaced but remained silent as Emily worked. His eyes flicked once more to Sarah, lingering longer than they should have before closing against the pain. The cattle were scattered, the fence broken, and blood still soaked the dry earth. But Sarah knew the true danger wasn't the outlaws. It was the secret fire now burning in her chest, a fire she could no longer ignore. The night pressed heavy on the ranch, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and the quiet groan of wood settling in the heat's aftermath. The outlaws were gone, but the blood they left behind seemed to stain more than the ground. It lingered in the air, in Sarah's chest, in every glance that passed between her and Ayoka. He lay in the bunkhouse, stretched across a narrow cot, his shoulder bound tightly with linen. The flicker of lamplight gilded the strong lines of his chest, each breath rising slow but steady despite the wound. His long black hair fanned across the pillow, damp from sweat, tribal jewelry glinting faintly as though it belonged to another world entirely. Sarah had insisted on staying with him while Emily tended to the cattle. She told herself it was practical. Emily couldn't be everywhere at once, and someone had to keep watch in case fever took him. But deep down, Sarah knew her reasons ran darker, more dangerous. She dipped the rag into the basin, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to his forehead. His eyes opened at the touch, dark and sharp even in pain. "You shouldn't linger here," he murmured, his voice gravelly, heavy with exhaustion. Sarah forced a smile, though her hands trembled. "Someone has to make sure you don't bleed yourself dry." His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. "Emily trusts you," he said slowly, as though testing the weight of the words. The mention of her sister twisted something in Sarah's gut. She looked away, focusing on the firelight that crackled in the small stove. "Emily trusts everyone too much," she said softly, almost to herself. Silence stretched, filled only by the wind brushing against the shutters. Finally, Ayoka shifted, wincing as he sat up straighter. Sarah instinctively reached out to steady him, her hand splaying against the heat of his bare chest. His skin was hot beneath her palm, his heartbeat steady, solid and much too close. She snatched her hand back, but his eyes caught hers, and for a moment neither of them moved. The room seemed to shrink, the world collapsing to the narrow space between them. "Why do you look at me that way?" he asked quietly, almost accusingly. Sarah's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words rose unbidden. "Because I can't help it," she whispered. The admission hung in the air like a gunshot. Ayoka's jaw tightened, his muscles flexing as though bracing against an unseen blow. For a long moment he said nothing. "You shouldn't speak that," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "It's a path that will bring only sorrow. Emily is my wife." "I know," Sarah said, her voice breaking on the words. "I know it's wrong. But when I see you, when I think of you, I—" Her throat closed, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She turned away, ashamed of the tremor in her voice. Ayoka's hand moved hesitant, slow, and came to rest on hers. His calloused palm was warm, grounding. She froze, every nerve alive with the forbidden's contact. I am bound to Emily, he said again, but softer this time, as though convincing himself as much as her. She has given me her trust. And you are her blood. Sarah swallowed hard, the weight of his hand burning into her skin. Then why don't you let go? She asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes closed, his breathing deepened, and for a moment Sarah thought he might be praying for strength. Finally, he withdrew his hand and leaned back, wincing against the pain in his shoulder. You should go, he said, his voice firm now. If Emily finds you here, questions will rise. And neither of us can carry that burden. Sarah's chest constricted, but she forced herself to stand. She smoothed her skirts, gathering her composure, though her legs felt weak. At the door, she turned back once more. The lamplight carved shadows across Ayoka's face, his expression unreadable. Yet his eyes betrayed him. They followed her, lingering as though he, too, fought a war within himself. Sarah left before she could say anything else, the night air hitting her like a cold slap. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding violently. She knew she had crossed a line that could never be undone. But as she walked back toward the main house, one truth echoed louder than the cicadas in the grass. Whatever this was between her and Ayoka, it was no longer something she could bury. And sooner or later, Emily would see it too. The morning dawned pale and uneasy, the horizon washed in muted golds that failed to warm the chill in Sarah's chest. She stood by the corral, her hands gripping the fence rail, eyes fixed on the herd as though the restless shifting of the cattle might drown out the pounding of her thoughts. Behind her, the bunkhouse door creaked open. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. She felt Ayoka's presence before he spoke, the quiet weight of his steps, the controlled strength in every movement even as his shoulder still bore the mark of the outlaw's bullet. Your sister is looking for you, he said. His voice calm, steady too steady. Sarah forced herself to face him. His long black hair caught the morning light, loose and wind-tossed, his bare chest partially wrapped with fresh linen. Tribal jewelry clinked faintly against his skin. He looked as though he had been carved from the land itself, unmovable, unyielding. And yet, when his eyes met hers, she saw the same storm that churned within her. I don't know how much longer I can pretend, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His jaw tightened, his gaze flicking briefly toward the ranch house where Emily moved about inside, unaware of the fire burning only steps away. We have no choice, Sarah. Emily's trust. It's the thread that holds us all together. Her throat burned. But what about what's here? She pressed her hand to her chest, her voice breaking. What about the way you look at me? The way I can't breathe when you're near? Ayoka stepped closer, shadows deepening the hard lines of his face. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, pull her into the embrace she had dreamed of since the canyon fire. But instead, he stopped short, fists clenching at his sides. What you want, he said, voice low, could destroy your sister. And it would destroy me. The words cut sharper than any knife, but before Sarah could reply, the sound of boots on the porch froze them both. Emily appeared in the doorway, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled, but her eyes, sharp and unyielding, were locked on the two of them. She had seen enough. What's going on here? Emily's voice carried like a whip crack. Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Emily descended the steps slowly, her gaze moving from Sarah's pale face to the warrior at her side. I felt it for weeks, she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. The stolen glances, the way you linger near him, Sarah. I told myself I was imagining it. But I see now I wasn't. Tears burned Sarah's eyes. Emily, it's not. Don't lie to me. Emily's words cut clean through her plea. She turned on Ayoka then, her expression hard, but her voice breaking beneath it. And you swore yourself to me. To this family. Was it all just duty? Did you ever? Ayoka's silence was worse than any confession. He bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. The air thickened, heavy as thunder before a storm. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her, everything she had feared unraveling in an instant. Finally, Emily drew in a shaky breath, straightening her shoulders. "This ends now," she said. "Sarah, you'll pack your things. You can't stay here. Not if this is what you've allowed into your heart." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "Emily, please." But Emily's face was stone. "I won't have betrayal under my roof." "Blood or not," Ayoka finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "If anyone leaves, it should be me." Emily's eyes flashed, pain tearing through her composure. "No, you are my husband. You will honor that vow." She is the one who must go. Sarah's heart cracked wide open. The man she could never have, the sister she could never betray. And yet betrayal was all that remained. With shaking hands, she nodded, swallowing back a sob. "I'll go," she whispered. The decision sealed itself in the morning air, sharp as the cry of a hawk overhead. Sarah turned from them both, tears blinding her as she walked toward the house. Every step felt like a blade carving deeper into her chest. Behind her, she didn't hear Emily speak again, nor Ayoka. But she felt his gaze follow her, heavy, burning. A silent farewell neither of them dared to give voice to. And in that silence, Sarah knew her life on the ranch, her bond with her sister, and the secret fire she carried for Ayoka, all of it had been scorched beyond repair.